Hello, I want to talk to you about the traditional forms, as your textbook calls it, or a simpler way to understand it, or types of interviews. It's important to be able to divide the interviews we're taking a look at throughout the semester into the various types. And this is just a way of thinking, theorizing, a way of taking the broad selection of interviews. And remember, the textbook defines interviewing pretty broadly. This is a way to divide interviews into different categories so we can talk about what you should do in each category or type of interview. So this is basically how the book breaks it down. Info giving and gathering, those two are sort of related. Selection, which is employment, and we'll talk about that a little more. Review of the EE or RR, those two are related. And finally, persuasion. So let's just go through each one. And I'm going to go through in a different order, than the textbook goes into, but I want to start with selection. I think that's the easiest one. Selection, most people would think of just as employment. This is when you're trying to get a job, right? But there are definitely different parts of that. We're going to break it down into three parts. The first being screening, right? This is when there is a good example is a job fair. When there is an RR who's a recruiter and they are looking at resumes, doing many interviews with lots of college students, trying to determine which ones will be the best to go on to the second type of selection interviews, which is the actual employment interview itself. Typically, they're going to bring in 3 people into the company headquarters to interview for a job. And that's what we typically think of when we're talking about employment interviews. But there's one more that we don't think of very often, or maybe you haven't considered it. It's a promotional interview. These usually happen. People don't even know they're happening. They might be competitive within the company, but typically this is someone's up for a promotion to move from mid-level management to upper-level management, to move from entry-level to mid-level management. This is, again, is an interview situation. It's a little different from employment, but it is related. But just wanted to mention that one as another type of selection interview. And then if we get out of thinking about selection or job interviewing, there are other types of interviews too that fall under this category. Fraternity or sorority rush. This becomes a selection interview. This is a screening process, right? You've got a lot of people. You bring them in for a week and do different activities and decide which ones you want to offer a bid to join your group. Then that bid becomes maybe in a possible employment situation where you actually join the organization. If I take another example, military recruitment, bringing people in to see if they actually are a good fit for the organization before they sign up, make sure they know what they're going into. And then just another example for promotional interview would be Senate or House hearings where they're confirming candidates for cabinet positions in the government, that sort of thing. So those are some good examples of selection interviews. Now let's go on to the next one, info gathering. This one's pretty easy to understand too. And you see the clipboards here. Often info gathering involves note-taking. In the case of a journalist, you're trying to get sound bites, get facts, get information for your story. So a journalist definitely does information gathering interviews. People who do questionnaires or surveys, marketers, they're definitely gathering information. Doctors, nurses, therapists, counselors may be doing information gathering, diagnostic type interviews where they are asking the patient, gathering information before making a diagnosis. Investigators, police officers, people who are trying to determine what happened in a crime or who is guilty or who to arrest. You're obviously asking questions to gather information to make a decision. Now, one you might not have thought about as an information gathering, but you may have been on the interviewee side of this, is parents. Often with teenagers and sometimes with college students, parents are have to conduct information gathering activities to find out what that was they found in your room, or what did that text mean, or why did you fail that class, or whatever the reason might be. But that's a definite info gathering situation. Well, that's a pretty easy one. Let's go on to info giving. This is just the reverse. Instead of the RR gathering information from the EE, the RR is giving information to the EE. Coaching is a good example. In coaching, the interviewer, the coach, is giving information to the interviewees, or trying to tell them what they did, or what to do, or what the next play is, or how to execute a play. Maybe an easier example to understand would be job training. If you've ever had a new job, you've had to go through orientation and training where they had to show you how to make the product, how to interact with the customer. That's definitely an information giving, where there's an interviewer giving information to the new employees so that they will understand. Orientation's a good one. You've all been through orientation. You know how much information is given to you. I used to have to do this in my PR job, do orientation for parents and try to teach them in a short period of time all the rules and regulations regarding campus food, campus parking, all that sort of stuff, answer their questions. And so really tough to give the information, to convey the information to the people effectively. So these are tough interviews. And then, this is one some of you might go into where you're making presentations to clients, donors, different groups. Maybe it's your job to meet with people who transport hazardous waste across state lines and tell them how to do it safely. So you hold a seminar and to give them a certification and to explain to them how to do it. It becomes a teaching, info giving situation where you are the interviewer and everyone in the room are interviewees. All right, let's go on to the next one, persuasion interviews. These are, you can think of sales as probably the easiest one to understand. In this case, it's a car salesman, salesperson meeting with a couple to sell them the car. But this is definitely an interview situation where there are questions asked and there's a definite serious purpose. And there's a process to it. You definitely have two different separate parties, but all sales interviews are persuasive interview situations. Another situation, I don't know if you've ever run into this, but religious conversion. There are lots of religions out there who seek to convert others. They often go out trying to persuade you to convert. That's definitely an interview situation. And this is one you'll encounter after you graduate for sure. Appalachian will begin contacting you, asking you to donate money to the university. And it will happen very soon after you graduate. And this is definitely an interview situation where they're making a request, trying to persuade you to give money to the university. All right, let's go on to review of EE and RR. This one's a little harder to understand, but I think we can do it here. This is review. It usually means there's a problem. There's a problem with the interviewee. Review of interviewee. So in this case, the interviewer is bringing the interviewee in to talk about a problem. Now, if you've ever worked anywhere, you've probably gone through a performance review. Those are review of EE situations. If you've gone through a performance review, you know it's sort of a yearly or every 6 months process where your boss brings you in and you talk about how you've done, set new goals, evaluate. It might even be by a committee. Typically it is by more than one person, or increasingly it is. But your performance is reviewed by other people. Maybe your probation officer, if you've been in this situation. Hope not, but I've got a friend who's a probation officer, and she does a lot of these type interviews. It's interesting, the first question she always asks is to empty your pockets. Will you please empty your pockets? And often the people who are on probation have all sorts of things that they're not supposed to in their pockets, and it's just a very effective opening question for her interviews. Again, meeting with a professor, student meeting with a professor. The interviewer might call a student in to talk about grades, assignments, maybe falling behind, maybe to talk about a paper they wrote and that it's really great and you should submit it to a conference. So this is when the interviewer calls the interviewee in because there's something going on with the interviewee that they need to talk about. At work, maybe there's been a sexual harassment complaint against you, and your boss brings you in to talk to you about that or interview you about that. So there are all sorts of situations where the problem is with the interviewee. Now, the reverse of that is when the problem is with the interviewer, the RR. Now, typically these interviews are initiated by the interviewee. I love this old photo with the old phone, but it sort of illustrates. This is the angry customer interview. When something goes wrong and they want to talk to the manager, they want to talk to the person in charge and figure out how to solve it, right? These are customer complaint interviews. This is when there's a problem with the interviewer. This is when you get the estimate of how much it's going to cost to get the car fixed, right? And you are definitely asking questions, conducting an interview, trying to figure out what's going on. This can also be when you have a problem with your boss, with the company policy, and you initiate an interview as the interviewee. You say, hey, I want to meet with you to talk about this issue. We need to figure this out. The problem was with the interviewer, and the boss probably conducts that interview. The RR conducts it, but you maybe initiated it as the interviewee. So these two are pretty related, but I think you get the point there. There they all are. Some of them are interrelated. The important thing is to sort of have a good idea of what each one is. And if I give you an interview, trying to place it in the proper category. Thanks.